About 5 years ago, I started learning the Unity game engine. Since then, I've done 15 game jams in Unity, released a mobile game on Google Play, and sold a commercial game on Steam. This video will go through my journey with Unity, from the first tutorial I followed up to my first commercial game. I'll also address the question of, did I choose the right engine to learn? But first, we need to go all the way back. The year is 2019, and I'm watching some YouTube, probably Steve Gaming or some other Nintendo content, when I get recommended a video by a channel called Blackthorn Prod about something called a Ludum Dare. Once I verified that these were in fact real words, I found out that this guy actually makes real video games. In fact, he made this one in only 3 days. Side note, this was back when you could just do a game jam, upload a video about it, and people would watch it. You didn't have to have some crazy twist or have 100 people working on it. Anyway, this video intrigued me. At the time, I had only made games in Scratch and Code.org, and these real game engines seemed intimidating, but Noah, aka Blackthorn Prod, broke down the process into manageable steps. Make the basic art, code the game loop, add features, polish the game. I started watching a few more game jam videos, and soon, I was hooked. As with many people, I also started following Danny when he made his 0.5 years of game dev video and his devlogs for Off the Sticks. Pretty soon I had reached that point of no return where I knew I'd have to try this stuff. So I downloaded Unity and started looking for learning resources. I know what you're thinking. Did I use Bracky's excellent tutorial? Or maybe one of the other ones on YouTube? Nope. I found a tutorial on Unity Learn for a Rollerball game and bought an ebook that taught you how to navigate the engine. I know, not conventional, but it worked out. Pretty soon I had my own Rollerball masterpiece, along with a little 3D platformer. I was pretty proud of the Rollerball game since I modified some of the scripting. Instead of rotating, these cubes hover in a sine wave pattern. It's simple, but it's the first C# scripting I ever did on my own. By comparison, the 3D platformer is pretty simple. I probably just copy-pasted all the code from whatever tutorial I used. Later on, I made a more original game that was reminiscent of 2D Zelda. You play as a little cube with a sphere that acts like your sword. I didn't use a tutorial for this one, so I had to look up almost everything, like the high score feature. In fact, these early games taught me a lot about how object-oriented programming works in general, since they forced me to use actual classes and objects instead of a bunch of if statements and for loops. Unfortunately, as you can probably tell, I don't have the project file of this game anymore, or a video of it. This next game is a little more substantial though, which is good because it's a lot more interesting. This is my first attempt at a long-term project. I wanted to keep it pretty simple, mostly relying on Unity's physics. This gave me the idea to have the main character be a ball, which you can move by, let's say, controlling the wind. And a name comes naturally at that point. Get the Ball Rolling. Pretty catchy, huh? Get the Ball Rolling is a 2D platformer where you play as a bowling ball and navigate some levels using your momentum. I added some little bowling pins as enemies. They automatically right themselves if you bump into them, but they fly away if you hit them hard enough. This was also the very first 2D game I made in this engine, so I decided to make the art in Scratch using the built-in drawing tools. I made several levels for this game, 2 in a grassy environment, 1 inside a building with moving platforms, and 1 in a desert. These have some neat features too. The indoor one has a boss fight against a giant pin, and the desert level has a car that you have to jump out of. I even made a trailer for the game that's now long gone. Pretty soon after that though, I abandoned the project. Working on a larger game was certainly an eye-opening experience, but I decided that I needed to cut my teeth on something more simple. You have to remember that at this point I was still watching plenty of Game Jam post-mortem videos from Blackthorn Prod, Danny, Brackies, and other creators. I hadn't worked up the courage to make an itch.io account and start publishing my own games yet, but I figured a Game Jam would be the perfect way to start. So I started looking at a few smaller jams without making an itch account and attempting some games. One of these was, I believe, supposed to be a farming game where you pluck vegetables out of the ground. This one was supposed to be a roguelike where you traverse rooms and maybe turn into monsters. I got as far as the extremely slow room generation before deciding I wouldn't be able to finish the game. Pretty soon though, I'd actually finished my first jam game. It was called Dr. Throw. You play as a titular doctor, moving left and right while monsters approach from both sides of the screen. You can pick up the monsters and throw them at each other. When 2 monsters collide, they have different effects depending on the type. These 2 make a smoke cloud, these 2 make a bomb that freezes the game, and these 2 make a nice snowman. It's pretty fun. It even has a custom soundtrack made in Beatbox. But for whatever reason, I never got around to actually making an itch account and submitting it to the jam, so it's just been sitting in my SSD. Luckily, the next jam would change all that. The jam I picked wasn't anything fancy like Ludum Dare or the GMTK jam. It was just the first one I saw was coming up, which happened to be Weekly Game Jam number 128. The theme of the jam was camouflage, which gave me the idea for a platformer where you switch the two objects on opposite sides of you. I guess the objects would camouflage as each other, so you play as this little square guy who can do exactly that. There were only 10 levels, but it still felt adequately long thanks to their puzzling nature. Fun fact, this last open-ended level, if you could call it a level, uses the grassy platform from Get the Ball Rolling. I also added some polish, mainly this giant particle explosion when you switch two objects. There's custom music for the title screen and the levels made in Beatbox. And most importantly, I actually made an itch.io account and submitted it to the jam. I called the account Unfocused Locust Games since my username at the time, Scratch the Greatest, wouldn't really work for a Unity developer. And for a first jam game, I'd say I knocked this one out of the park. It didn't win the jam or anything, but I'm still very proud of it. I'd later make a post-jam version with 10 more levels, a level editor, and a new song. But once I completed that jam, I was officially a Unity game developer. So what's next? After finishing the Switcher, I felt more confident in my abilities as a game dev. With a complete jam under my belt, I was trying out some more expansive projects like Space Pioneer, which was basically Space Invaders in reverse. Unfortunately, I only got as far as the opening cutscene. At that point though, the Brackeys Game Jam came around, so I dropped everything else and joined that jam. This jam, which took place in February 2020, was a little more high profile. I would get some more feedback than I did on the Switcher, which would be helpful. It was a week-long jam, but I was busy with school all week, so I only ended up working on it for 2 days over the weekend. So what did I come up with? Well, the theme was holes, so I had the idea to be cheeky and make a game about a whale and its blowhole. Even though in retrospect that's only a singular hole, not holes plural. Oh well. You control this whale and shoot water out of your blowhole at birds as they fly across the screen. This game's a bit more polished than the Switcher. I like the art better, there's some nice screen shake, and even some slow-mo and zoom in when you lose, which is a pretty neat effect. It's also pretty deep for an arcade-style game since there's a fair bit of strategy regarding when and where to shoot water. I also added a few difficulty settings in the post-jam version. And I enjoyed the soundtrack I made in GarageBand, aping the Pirates of the Caribbean theme song. All in all, is this game better than the Switcher? I can't say for sure, but I was certainly on the right path here. The next jam was a bit smaller, the Duality Jam held by 8-Bits to Infinity. This jam took place over my spring break in the middle of March 2020, when we all thought we'd be heading back to school the next week. So while the world was crashing down, I was jamming. The theme was Mirror Worlds, which to me sounded like the perfect opportunity to make a top-down game. The jam also has some optional restrictions. Make a game using only 2 colors, have all the text in your game be made up of palindromes, or use sound effects to build up a music track. I decided to theme my game around those first 2 challenges, giving the game its name of Colorolock. The 2 mirror worlds were represented by the colors I chose, pink and purple. You control a little square guy and your goal is to reach this coin while avoiding these demons. Luckily for you, pressing space unleashes this projectile that sends any demons it hits to the other world, but touching the coin transports you into that world, so the game ends up being more about planning than quick reactions. You have to weigh your current suffering against your future suffering. This strategic gameplay does start to feel repetitive pretty soon, and the music and sound effects are kind of abrasive. The nail in this game's coffin though was a glitch I was experiencing with Unity where you couldn't export games to the web no matter what I tried. The problem ended up being the Brotli compression I was using in Unity, by the way. This glitch sucked up a lot of the time I would have spent polishing the game. As a result, Colorolock is probably my least enjoyable game out of these first 3, but I was getting very comfortable with the basics of Unity and I could tell the next jam would be my chance to shine. The jam in question was the Untitled Game Jam First Birthday Bash. The theme was turn-based, which was a little daunting since I hadn't done a turn-based game in Unity yet, but confident in my skill, I decided to lean into it. I planned out a game called Turnkey, a turn-based RPG where you attack enemies by typing words on your keyboard. I came up with a story about a little robot who learns to, it's kind of vague, but it led me to rename the game to Wordless. This was the first game I made with vector graphics, which you could export from scratch as SVG files. I started out with the battle scene, which is reminiscent of Earthbound. For your basic attack, you type in a word relating to the enemy. You can also use some unlockable special powers, which require you to type in specific words. Strangely, there's no time limit, so you can hunt and peck all you want. It's more about not making mistakes and honing your strategy. There's some good polish to this battle screen, some screen shake, a nice soundtrack, and clean UI, but the overworld isn't quite quite there. The Earthbound inspiration didn't hold up all too well with the NPCs. Instead of that game's witty dialogue, these characters have lame jokes or foreboding warnings about the boss fight ahead. Between those NPCs, you have to make a very slow walk through a barren overworld with some mediocre art. Luckily, this part of the game got some substantial post-jam updates. I redid all the art, shrunk down the overworld, and added a new song for the final boss. Looking past its flaws though, this is certainly my most ambitious game yet, and it mostly worked. My plans were getting bigger and bigger, but let's see what happens if we scale back. This next jam was another big one, the 2020 GMTK Game Jam. This is my first 48-hour jam, and the theme was Out of Control. At this point, I had a mental list going of what genres I had tried out in Unity, and I noticed a gap in sports themes games ever since Get the Ball Rolling. This gave me the idea for a golf game where you can't aim your shots. Instead, you get 3 or 4 predetermined swings and you can control the wind using the arrow keys. I got the wind controls working, then drew up some levels in Scratch and added hitboxes manually in Unity for things like water hazards or bunkers. I also added trampolines, which were fun and added to the pseudo 3D look of the game. I made some music in GarageBand, but I ran out of time to make sound effects. Overall, this would have been my best game yet, but it was marred by a simple control issue. I handled the input in fixed update instead of update, so the game seemed to eat your inputs about half of the time. I corrected this in the post-jam version, but it marred the initial ratings for the game. Regardless, I consider this jam a success. After the Untitled Game Jam First Birthday Bash went so well, I decided to do another Untitled Game Jam. This one was number 31, and the theme was low-budget clone of an existing game. Some people did Doom or Super Hot, but I decided to be funny and do Hotel Mario, a notoriously awful Mario game for the Philips CDI. For my version, I wanted to turn it into an actually good platformer, so I designed our main character, Mart. I used a doodly art style meant to evoke prototype art, but ironically that style makes this one of my best looking games. As for the gameplay, you just have to touch a door to open it, like the real Hotel Mario. If you open all the doors, you advance to the next level. The real fun of the game comes from the various props and the interactions between them. Of course, you've got your crates along with boulders that roll down hills, but you also have these mattresses you can bounce on along with balloons that float upwards. These work together to make some micro challenges that are really enjoyable. To me, there are a lot of standout levels here. For the last one, I just threw all the props into one big level and let you roam around. Once again, I made some music in GarageBand for this one. Although I'm not the biggest fan of that title theme, the level music is really good and eventually became the disco chorus theme in Breezy. I also found the time to make some sound effects like this door open sound that breaks your eardrums. And surprisingly, my hard work paid off and I won the jam. Well, technically it was a tie, and technically there were less than 10 participants, but it felt great nonetheless. I also got to see my game being streamed by the jam hosts, which was almost more rewarding. In terms of results, this was certainly my best jam yet, and it got me inspired for the next one. And this next jam was a doozy. Finally, after a year of watching people do it, I was ready to participate in my very first Ludum Dare. This is the 47th iteration, and the theme was Stuck in a Loop. Once again, I went down the list of the genres I had made. One genre I wanted to try was a straight-up puzzle game, as in not a puzzle platformer. I remember playing a game on Coolmath Games called Ninja Painter, which was kinda like that mobile game, Tomb of the Mask. I wanted to make a game with this style of movement, but with a twist. Scattered around each level are some trampolines that bounce you back in the other direction. You have to get stuck bouncing between 2 trampolines to beat the level. I coded up the basic movement, got the animation working, and made the basic props. Then it was time to design some levels. Unfortunately, this is where my time got cut short unexpectedly, so I only had time to make 5. They were pretty substantial though. As for music, I made the level theme in LMMS, an audio software that I was trying out at the time, and I made the title theme by just recording myself playing it on the piano. And and slightly disappointed by my lack of time, I posted it to the Jam website. Looking back, this game actually got a lot more positive feedback than I remembered. I think I gave it way too much flack for being short, but everyone else seemed to really enjoy it. I also tried out something new in promoting this game. In mid-August 2020, I had started uploading the soundtracks to all my Jam games on this channel, just for fun and so that I could listen to them without booting up the games. I also uploaded the little trailer for Insane that I put on the itch page. For Super Looper though, I decided to publish some more biographical content for the first time. I made Ludum Dare 47 level design as my first real video, which in my opinion started the journey of this channel. Speaking of journeys though, at this point in my Unity career, I consider myself fairly experienced, at least enough so that I could think about making a larger game. You see, with all the game dev YouTubers I watched, they would do a few Game Jam postmortems, but then they would start uploading devlogs for commercial games to be released on Steam. And inevitably, they would never come up with a real plan or a deadline for the game, instead stretching out the game's development ad infinitum. And in retrospect, this makes sense. If I had a project I could just keep making videos about, getting that steady YouTube paycheck, it would certainly be tempting. By the way, remember to subscribe to the channel. But that's not what I was doing. I was here to finish games. So, I started planning. First, a visual prototype on paper, then a design document. The game was called Wing It. It will be a mobile game themed around Valentine's Day. Since I was starting around November 2020, that would give me 3 months to make the game before a February 14th release date. Because Steam still felt pretty unapproachable and expensive, I decided to make it a mobile game. You play as Cupid. Tap on the screen to teleport into your finger, and drag to aim his bow. As you hold down your finger, the bow charges until you release your finger to fire an arrow. These little multicolored people spawn randomly around the screen, and your goal is to line up 2 or more of them and combine them into one. And what happens if you don't? Well, they start aging. And if one of them dies of old age, it's game over. It sounds complicated, but it's dead simple once you wrap your head around the concept. I got started right away, coding up the basic gameplay loop with Cupid. I got the movement working, then coded up the bow functionality. Luckily, coding a mobile game wasn't that different from a PC game, so I was chugging along. I also decided to follow in the footsteps of my favorite creators and market the game with devlogs of my own. I made them by recording my voice using iMovie on my iPad, then exporting that video onto Dropbox, where I would add footage in OpenShot and make a thumbnail using Adobe Spark. Truly revolutionary. But when you're making devlogs, you want the game to look good. Like my Jam games, I wanted this one to have some juice. I added some heart-shaped particles along with a ridiculous amount of freeze frame when you combine 2 or more of these guys. To make it even more impactful, I added a silhouette effect to the freeze frame where the background would turn black and everything else would flash white. This effect looked awesome, but while playtesting it, I noticed that I kept trying to aim the bow during this freeze frame. I also noticed that the charge time on the bow was starting to get annoying. To remedy this, I killed 2 birds with 1 stone. When this freeze frame happens, if you tap and drag Cupid like normal, your bow gets fully charged automatically. This is kind of a natural combo system that was immediately intuitive and fun to use. It also allows for some really fast-paced and technical gameplay for my comparatively simple mobile game. Unfortunately, during playtesting, I realized that players, i.e. my dad and sister, weren't discovering this combo system as easily as I did, so I decided to make it an unlockable ability. You see, I designed this heart currency that you earn by racking up points in-game. You can spend it on the shop that sells unlockable abilities. This combo system is the cheapest to unlock, so players will probably be able to afford it after a round or 2. You can also buy more difficulty modes, which in turn give you more hearts, along with power-ups and other ways to earn more points. I will admit that I wish I handled the unlock system differently. As it is, the game starts out boring and laughably easy, and it only gets more interesting once you've unlocked almost everything. A proper tutorial and a natural ramp-up in difficulty probably would have solved a lot of this game's problems. One thing I have no regrets about though is the skin shop. I included a few random skins as well as some callbacks to my previous Scratch and Unity games. I also held a skin competition on Scratch and added the winners to the game. To match the 8-bit aesthetic, I made some music in FamiTracker that I still really enjoy. Finally, I added a basic story where I decided that these little multicolored guys are actually robots. Weird, I know. As for those devlogs, I made 4 of them, with the last one also acting as a release announcement. These devlogs didn't launch my channel to virality or anything, but they were really fun to make, and they taught me a lot about editing. Finally, on Valentine's Day 2021, I released the game on Google Play and GameJolt to very little fanfare. Although I was a little bummed out that almost nobody downloaded it, I was mostly just happy to have a complete commercial game under my belt and something I could show to my friends. About a year later, I tweaked the game a bit, changing how the point system worked and fixing a few bugs, and I tried to get the updated version on Cool Math Games. Unfortunately, they ghosted me, so I published a new version on itch.io where you can play it now. It's still really fun, and it's where we'll leave my Unity journey for now, because we still have to address the other part of this video. There have always been alternatives to Unity, but these days the playing field is getting wider than ever. I'm mainly talking about the rise of Godot here. We're finally seeing a true open source alternative in the world of game dev. So with that in mind, did I make the right decision in learning Unity instead of Godot or some other engine? Well, with Godot specifically, you have to remember that I started learning Unity back in 2019 with an ebook. I doubt I even knew about Godot since the engine was way less mature back then and the community was even smaller. Besides that, the second place competitor to Unity was Unreal Engine. It was certainly a close call, but C++ just felt too complex for little old 13-year-old me. Also, Construct and GameMaker were both comparatively larger back then, with GameMaker being generally considered the third place game engine, but they felt more limited. Of course, the real reason was that all the game devs I watched on YouTube were using Unity, but that's a good reason. As I continued to learn, I had a wealth of valuable resources thanks to the engine's huge and long-standing community. Also remember that this was really my first time using object-oriented programming in general. If I had started out with more game dev or coding experience, Godot or Unreal might have looked more appealing, but to my kid brain, they were for coding experts. Of course, these days things are different. If you follow my Twitter, you'll have seen the little Godot game I'm working on right now. I'm using GDScript this time instead of C#, and it's really shown me the potential of this engine. It's very fun and refreshing to use, in fact, but this is only thanks to my existing experience with Unity. Had I started out learning Godot instead of Unity, I would have had the same learning curve, but I wouldn't have had that wealth of resources to help me. In all likelihood, I probably would have just switched to Unity, and that's the real crux for me. So, that's roughly the first half of my Unity journey. I didn't do the whole thing because, well, have you seen the length of this video? Also, I'm saving the next installment for a deep dive on the development of Breezy, which is my biggest game dev project by far, and which I started work on only a few months after releasing Wing It. By the way, I decided to make a Discord server to kindle the flame of the Mondobi community. I'll be sharing updates about my various projects, and it'll be generally a fun space to hang out, so consider joining it. And either way, have a good day.
This is Wing It, an Android game I'm creating in Unity. I've been working on it for a couple weeks now, so let's cover some of the features that are already in the game.